Okay, this lesson for the Quantity Project class addresses the bridging of knowledge gaps. For example, we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make him drink. That's an old saying, I suppose. It's true, but if he's thirsty, he'll drink. So that's really not a problem. It's when you build a bridge between knowledge gaps, sometimes vested interests, preferences, pressures, doxastic coercion, in the form of coercion, which we've seen that throughout history. And sometimes people, just because we build a bridge doesn't mean people want to cross it or even have a need. So it's not that we have intention of coercing people. It just, when you bridge it, it doesn't mean they will come, so to speak. And let me move my old homemade protractor here. And for example, when we notice that gulf between young, and old Earth, young and old, it was wide. I mean, we thought it was. It was the way it was presented, and among most people, a majority, there's really not a lot of interest in building the bridge. And I've noticed people never really cared about old, and people never really cared about young. And then when it receives energy, it's catalyzed, and then of course, this is a little, it's like a slide rule to me, but it's just the Hebrew alphabet. This is the printed font, and then of course here's the block form in the back, and you can just work through this. It has the numbers, numeric value, and that helps because there's a lot of information. But really, who has the interest? Well, as a pastor in a local New Testament covenant community, it's of great interest for, and it may just be a few that might be distressed over the large gap perceived. And the gap between young and old Earth is quite ironic because even within that gap is a dispute or discussion about what they call the gap theory. So we'll just start with that and see what it looks like to build this bridge and see really who has the interest and is it worth it. Like I said, as a pastor, I make sure I take care of the sheep entrusted. And, it's a low threshold of entry to just pick a category, a formed category, and then to lead out, if you will, with for or against, if that's about all people know. And that's usually the case when people first introduce it to me in a class. Most of them aren't aware of, in our library at Landmark, for example, we have textbooks by authors of the seminary and former our organizing pastor. The late L.D. Foreman was president of the Missionary Baptist Seminary, the seminary there in Little Rock, the oldest Bible school in Arkansas. So he has books in there. So it's quite remarkable, such a history, a legacy of education. So we can see why it'd be of interest when things like this occur later, especially in a congregation with that much Bible knowledge, education, and being so close as we are to the seminary. So let's just finish this. This is Genesis 1, and we'll do verse 2, and then we'll add a couple things and move on. Yeah. So this is a sign of the direct object. This is in beginning, created, Elohim, eighth, and then it's the heavens, Ha. Oh, left out. If you don't freehand it, don't be afraid of freehanding it. It's by now, some of you worked so long in here. Ha, Shamayim. There we go. Ha, Shamayim. Especially with a dry erase board, you can correct it. Ha, Shamayim. And then eighth, sign the direct object again. And at this point, how many people even have the interest to what is that text? What's it look like? Remembering that It's numeric. I don't know what I did with them. Oh, here. It's a letter. It's phonetic. It's numeric, and it's pictographic. All I have here is the block form on the back, and then I have the name and then the number. And that's a little old-fashioned, but I was so late to computers. I didn't even have one in the office. It was 2010 and still hadn't had a computer. And I didn't need it. We still don't necessarily if you want to practice and interact. So the heavens and haaretz. Now this is just my handwritten form, the heavens and the earth, okay? So should be 7 words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 28 letters, so we're good. 2 here, and it says, and the earth. There we go. And the earth came to be. Yatha. There we go. Now here's where we begin with what we would say were areas of controversy. This is the Strong's number H, 1961, and the Greek word in the Koine text is ginomai. You can find text, and it's G 1096. Notice the same, just one difference. If you just rearrange a little bit, it's 1960, 1961. So it's not hard, but that's the Koine Greek word. And you can find a text passage, the stone that the builders rejected has come to be. You can see that in the English Bible. You can see it in the Hebrew, and then you can see it translated in the Koine text as genomai. So that is where a lot of the, or some of the passage where a lot of the interest was focused. And then, of course, we have more here. Tohu. Yeah, let me fix that. Tohu va. You can look this up and correct it. It's really not. But go ahead and, if you're not freehanding now, you really need to be. Get a spiral notebook. You can get those at Walmart, or just for maybe on sale, you can get several of them and just start writing. Our language teacher encouraged us to write it out. Tohu, va, bohu. So this is another area. So here we have, let me just put asterisks here. This is where a lot of interest here. And then what is this? People ask what this is. What does it mean? So now as we move on, came to be this, and it says, and darkness, vi, koshek, yeah, koshek, darkness, al pnai. Some of these are common phrases for you who use it. Let's see. There we go. El Panai, upon faces. Yeah, faces of, this is a word here, tihom. There we go. The deep. There we go. So there's faces of the deep, upon faces, upon faces of the deep. This is darkness. But again, to build a bridge, you have to really have an interest in this, because most of the talk between those who pick young and old can simply be, with whom are we planning to have lunch with after our services are over, or whatever is going on out there. But to actually do research to see if there is a knowledge gap and to see how a bridge can be built, since we're operate on the premise that the Bible doesn't contradict. So faces of the deep and Let me see here. And ruach and spirit. There we go. Elohim again. Let's see where we're at here. There we go. Elohim. This is also, if you do any research in the Septuagint, it's Godhead, translated Godhead, Elohim. Again, I've worked on Koine so long. If you're not practicing, when you're working on problems in the Koine, that is in constructs that conflict, and you're focused in that area, be offline working on your Hebrew and Spirit of God, Ruach, Spirit of God. And this is Mirak. Kind of forgetting here. Mirakpeth. That's block style. So in Mirakpeth, okay, and Spirit of God was intensely, this is intensely hovering. And what I should have put in parentheses was intensely, but that's okay, it's too late. And Spirit of God was intensely hovering. Here we have, again, Al upon Pinai. Now I put Sir in surfaces. Okay, so in beginning, we have in beginning, created, the heavens, and the earth. There. And then as we go on with this, intensely hovering upon surfaces, let me see, this is related to the waters. Here we go. Hashamayim. What we have here now is Ha-ma-yim. So it's close, upon the waters. Okay, so that's enough for the moment. So that's one thing. You write it out. We go and notice here where there are points of controversy. We then, let's say this is number one. Let's take our lead-in passage. Then we have language. So there's the Hebrew word. There's the Koine word. We go find a text, as Dr. Penn taught us. Go find a text in the Greek New Testament, if there is one. Start with English, of course, where we had to start. And find the passage where it's quoted, if it is. And then look the words up in the Koine and see what equals what. And that'll help you. And then come here and find, after you deal with this first things first, then you come here and see what this is. And then look for where else does this occur. Look for cross references, things like that. Again, you're bridging an algebra, because for some, I noticed as a pastor, some people were seriously distressed, because for some it was a change from an old perspective to a young, and for others from a young to an old. We have people from quite a difference of backgrounds, diverse. It's a very multicultural community, people from all over here near the military base. So we have 1 and 2, the verses. Number 2, we had the one day as 1,000 years. Then we had 1,000 years as one day. And we notice, as Dr. Penn, hermeneutics professor, he loved working on this. And when he told me, he said, "I'm not a young or old earther." Well, that's very common for a Baptist, for example, who they have asserted historically that they are neither Protestant nor Catholic, and of course not Judaic, Islamic, occultic, New Age, or any type of denominational, whatever that might be. But so when he said that, I was very intrigued, as I and Dr. Johnson, Dr. Robert Kelly, and others who collaborate were quite impressed to see. So this is chiasmus inversion. There we go. And then, of course, we take a third step, and we want to know between this assertion, for some it's 6 to 20,000 year. That's thousands as far as in the young assertion. So as we are trained to define our terms, so we assign that to chronological. But that seemed to be the concern. Most of the academic works from a generation ago all included in Bullinger to, well, Bullinger would be the, I guess, unsurpassed, but it was always noted that the genealogies were not intended for earth ageism, whatever. So they built strong cases to say that wasn't the purpose, because in the languages, sometimes a son is a term used. It could be a grandson or a great-grandson. But again, that was just to show that young would be chronological. So let's just put young. And then, of course, 3B, old, geological. But in just a few moments, with a little effort, you find out, has anyone really built a bridge? Of course, Dr. Penn, and of course the seminary gave us a panoply, very complex arrangement, a collection of tools that's unsurpassed. So you can, as a pastor, if you've attended the seminary, which is, the professors are all pastors. So they're working from the vantage point of what is it like to pastor. And yes, we're trained to bridge knowledge gaps, and then subsequent to that, we're bridging performance gaps. And that people, then myself, I can bridge a knowledge gap and then begin to close my behavior gap, if you will, from what I know to do then to what I actually do. And the more I know to do, the more I'm doing and closing the performance gap. So that's something very normal. It's just in the field of religion, I will just say that, as a human performance improvement technologist in a consultative training and background, both experience and education, bridging knowledge gaps requires an effort, subject matter expertise, specialized knowledge. So I knew when these things happen, you're never abandoned. In the American Baptist Association, for example, we're associational. We associate in function as well. So to return to my training, my textbooks, all my class notes, even the hermeneutics professor, where I served as his graduate assistant and now research assistant, they're all too happy to help to assure that things like this, because you push things far enough apart, people can really begin to be disillusioned and discouraged. So bridging the knowledge gaps is a way of helping. I know this doesn't sound like astrophysics, and I know there's people out there that write very elaborate, ornate, but we come up with equations, a ratio. I'll put links in it. We have a ratio that's in the Bible, have decay rates in the Bible. They've been changed. We know the difference between the chronological age and the geological, that we know things can be much older than the time they've existed. So that's good. This is enough. It's just an example of the types of things you'll do. Let me get out of the way. I'm trying to find the best place to stand here. I don't know how to do it. It gets smaller in this little room here. But there you can see when you set this down, work it out. First, it's hard to find, people of interest. Like I said, this is old-fashioned way of working, taking your block form with the numbers on the back, and like I said, it's really interesting because then you set it up pictographically. You want to see what's it depicting phonetically with these dots. That's called Masoretic vowel pointings. That can help with grammar, and it also helps me because I can remember, and then by sounding it out, I can remember how to write it out like that. There we go. And so those vowel pointings can be helpful, and then your consonants. So you have numeric values, you have pictographic depictions, it depicts pictographically, and then we have phonetics, of course. But we can set it down, use our numbers, go through the Bible, take the Bible numbers, and see the Bible has in it, what does it mean when Peter wrote, 1 day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day? Well, that's chiasmus inversion, just as it is in English. If you use your King James English version of the Bible, to which all the references, at one time it's all we had, and it's the last Bible that is the capstone of all the history of God's watch, care, and providence, and using even those called Baptist instrumental in assuring that book's here today. So if you use it, look words up, search for passages, and then I'll include links. We also have a video, a rationale for young Earth to help people understand how could something in just thousands of years accrued billions of years of decay. Dr. Albert Mohler tried to explain it, meaning he explained it, that is, he described it. Now, he didn't deploy this technique, the holistic hermeneutic method of Dr. John Penn, and apparently using the hermeneutic approach, holistic, the systematic approach, categorical of Dr. John Owen, and then the linguistic or lexical syntactical analytic approach by Dr. Murray, for example, who was the first language teacher I had. They really set you in an approach that converges, that'll produce a product greater than the sum of its parts. And it's the chief aim is do you really want to bridge a knowledge gap? And then once you build the bridge, you can encourage people who want to study to sit down. But again, finding people who want to do all this, I don't know. It's there's just not a lot of work like that. So not being, we don't have denominated doctrine prescribed to us like in a super denominationalism, whatever that is. So we'd prefer to be free to study, to research, to search the scriptures, and then research the scriptures, and then evaluate, define, document, and disclose what the fallible elements are between what's constructed and what's actually scripted. So enjoy this lesson, and if you've never done this type of work, bridge the knowledge gap, it can require more labor. Well, it is much more work than just someone picking a side, because to posit a text is quite a labor and requires subject matter expertise, specialized knowledge. And those who have been laboring in word and doctrine for 2,000 years, those specifically engaged in working in the Lord's churches to pastor, to teach, to reach, to do the work of evangelists, to equip the saints, to edify, build up. It comes through a lot of meticulous, methodical, systemic approach and willingness to do it. So have a blessed day.